Kath Megaw. I'm a Paediatric Dietitian and I've partnered with PediaSure. And we're going to bring you a series of talks with regards to helping you navigate your child's picky eating behavior. Today I'm going to start with the myths of feeding, because it's really important to unpack some of the things and the misconceptions that we believe around the feeding journey. And the first myth that we're going to unpack is that eating is instinctive. This is actually not true. Children initially know that they need milk when they are born, and they will want to drink and they will want to do that, and that's really important for survival. But as time goes on, it's definitely not as instinctive and it needs to actually be learned. And feeding actually then becomes learned behavior, especially when it comes to the introduction of solids. Children actually have to learn what solids are, how to navigate the food in their mouth, how to swallow that. And so something that has become very subconscious behavior for us as adults is very conscious behavior for a child. So just like when you learn to drive your car and you initially were focusing on every movement that you made, the steering wheel, the gears, shifting with the accelerator, the brake, and you were thinking about every step. And then eventually, as time went on, it became subconscious. And now when you drive, I suppose you don't even think about anything that you do. You just put your car in gear and off you go. And it's like that with our children. Initially, when they are starting their feeding journey, it is very conscious and they put a lot of energy, mind energy, physical energy into the feeding. And so as time goes on, it eventually becomes subconscious behavior. The second myth that I want to dispel is that eating is a two-step process. It's not. It's actually a 32-step process. Yes, that's right, 32 steps. So from seeing food to eventually digesting the food takes 32 steps. And so it is not as simple as just giving your child the food and they must swallow it. There's so much that goes into that. And they have to figure out how to navigate that. And in the beginning, when a baby starts eating, their tongue is still thrusting a lot of the food out. So they have to learn how to keep the food in their mouth. And then as a toddler, they've got to learn how to navigate different textures, different types of food combinations together. And then as a preschooler, they've got to learn how to use a knife and a fork and a spoon. And those type of things take a lot of energy and a lot of learning. So to get the food from their plate into their stomachs is a long journey. It becomes easier with practice and over time. But if they are tired or they've had a rough day or they're just not in the right headspace, going through all those steps seems like a lot of work and a lot of energy. And so we need to take this into consideration when working with our picky eater, is to be cognizant that it might be that it's a challenge. And at what point are they struggling? Maybe your little preschooler just needs you to feed them that day because they've just had a rough day at school and they're really tired and they can't navigate using the cutlery and then trying to eat and chew and then swallow the food. And so you can really understand then why they might be struggling with the meal. Not so much that they don't want the food, but they just can't go through those steps. The third myth is that eating is developmentally the same for every child. So previous myth, I explained that it's a 32-step process and it's a learning. So anything that requires learning means we're all going to do it in our own time and in our own way because we are all very different learners. And this same applies for feeding and for eating. So for your child's development, you may find that your friend's child is eating different food, maybe more sophisticated foods, a bigger variety of foods than what your child is eating. But possibly that friend's child is just further along in their feeding development than where your child is at. And just like when your child learned to crawl or learned to walk, they did it at their developmental pace, their developmental time. Same with speaking, same with sitting, smiling, all those other developmental milestones that we give so much time for and we allow so much bigger range. When it comes to feeding, we tend to be very focused that it must all happen now at this time, and we want to compare our child's feeding ability with other children. And this is often the problem, can cause a lot of stress, can cause you to do a lot of force feeding, and it causes just a lot of anxiety around the feeding that is unnecessary. So the takeaway message from this myth is that you need to remember that it's your child's own developmental pace that will determine their feeding speed. The fourth myth is that eating is the body's number one priority. Well, I'm going to dispel this one very quickly, because your body has many other priorities over and above eating. The biggest priority is the oxygen you breathe in and keeping your heart pumping, because without that, you wouldn't be alive. So eating becomes secondary to the basic functions of just keeping your body alive. And so if your child is sick or your child is super tired, their bodies will prioritize those functions over and above eating. And you need to always be aware of this so that you don't force feed during illness, because the priority there would be just to keep them hydrated and let them rest and let them sleep so that the body starts to feel healthy and safe again. So if you remember that, you will know that there has to be an intense hunger to drive your child to want to eat. So feeding a child when they're not hungry, with eating not being the body's number one priority, is not going to be very fruitful. And remember that children generally aren't emotional eaters, and we don't want to encourage that. So although we might eat because the atmosphere is nice, and even though we're not hungry, a child generally, even if they're having fun at a party, they won't even go to the party table because they're just enjoying what everyone else is doing and interacting with everyone else. So it's only as they grow and they get older and they start to make that association with emotion and feeding and things like that, that they actually then start to maybe have a different drive to eat other than just hunger. But initially for children, especially for toddlers, it is really just hunger that drives eating. And the final myth that I want to dispel today is that certain foods need to be eaten at certain times. So for example, what is breakfast food versus what is lunch food versus what is supper food? And this often can cause a lot of stress because, to be honest, a lot of children find breakfast food the easiest food to eat. And at the end of the day, when they've had a huge sensory overload and they've just had so much going on in their world, they are tired and they just want something that's comforting and easy. And we know that dairy products, the nutritional shake like PediaSure, that's like a comfort food. It's got good amounts of calcium in it, it's got magnesium in it, and we know those are your good sleep minerals, and they help you to calm down and to feel sleepy and restful at night. So possibly a nutritional supplement like PediaSure will be a wonderful way to end your child's day, versus this very sensory meal that's got all different colors and textures and tastes and flavors and smells, and it's just too overwhelming and too overpowering. And so that can even be rather a breakfast meal or a lunch meal versus a supper meal, especially if they've had a busy day. So consider that the next time you want to sit down to a meal at the end of the day and your child is tired and overwhelmed and whiny, and maybe consider pulling out those breakfast porridges with some milk and then a side supplement of a nutritional supplement like PediaSure, and you probably will have a win, and you'll have a very calm child, a well-fed child, and a child that will be able to fall asleep easily.